Hello and welcome to the Costing and Pricing Learning Program. My name is David Gilchrist and I'm the Director of the Curtin University's Not-for-Profit Initiative. I will be presenting a series of webinars as part of the Costing and Pricing Learning Program, and this is Webinar 1, which is an introduction to the learning program itself. In this webinar, we will have a look at the materials that are available and forming the Costing and Pricing Learning Program. We'll have a look at some of the elements associated with navigating between those materials, and we'll also have a look at some of the other aspects associated with this program, including in relation to copyright. So this particular webinar is really focused on identifying what's in the Costing and Pricing Learning Program and giving you some pointers as to how you might use the program. Particularly though, it's important to note that these webinars are intended really to be tasters of specific topics and to allow you to step off from the webinar into the materials with a bit of knowledge about the kinds of issues that you might want to be learning about, how you might approach costing and pricing in your organisation, and how you might approach the materials. As such, these webinars are relatively short, very focused, and due to the medium of presenting over this way, they tend to look at specific topics in some detail, but rely on the broader use of the Costing and Pricing Learning Program materials to be able to help you to look at the full extent and nuances of each of the topics dealt with. First and foremost though, I would like to discuss copyright in relation to these materials. All of these materials are copyright to National Disability Services, NDS, and Curtin University. However, all of the materials are provided as open source. In other words, the materials are available to be used by anyone, both from a commercial perspective, a personal use perspective, or organisationally or across organisations. You're able to use the seminars, the webinars, commercially, and you're allowed to use the materials to present commercially, to hire a trainer to present some of the materials, and so on. All of those things are absolutely fine. What is not able to be done under the copyright arrangements is that you're not able to disaggregate the materials. In other words, when you use the materials, you're not able to take specific slides or specific models and ideas out of those slides and use them elsewhere by themselves. You're also needing to retain the logos, colours and graphics, particularly making sure that you attribute the development of these materials both to National Disability Services, NDS, and Curtin University. So it's important that you maintain those logos, colours and so on. Finally, the notes must be retained as well. So where, for instance, in the seminars there are slides, there are also notes to those slides provided, then the aggregate of that material constitutes the seminar itself, and that cannot be disaggregated. So in other words, those notes must be retained. Remember, where you're using any of these materials for a private presentation, whether commercially or otherwise, Curtin Not-for-Profit Initiative and NDS must be acknowledged as the authors, owners and copyright holders of these materials. Let's just have a brief look at the overview or the objectives of the Costing and Pricing Learning Program. This is, of course, a professional development learning course. It's been developed in order to support the disability services sector to better understand their financial operations in order to maintain and build their financial stability. Its catalyst was the establishment of the NDIS, of course. However, the course of materials is designed to build skills focused on costing and pricing rather than purely to meet the NDIS as it stands at the moment. This is a really important issue. The NDIS is still developing and will likely change, but more importantly, it's not just the NDIS that triggers the need for costing and pricing. It is in fact financial sustainability and ongoing capacity of your organisation to provide services that triggers that need. So wherever there's an individualised funding / person-centred care policy in place in relation to funding arrangements for human services, costing and pricing is going to be critical. Having said that, of course, NDIS is central to this process. It's central to the needs of each disability service provider, and so of course we continually return to the NDIS when we look at examples and processes associated with costing and pricing. The central theme of the program, though, is the idea that organisations need to cost and price in order to arrive at what we call a target price. That is, the price they would charge to ensure full cost recovery and financial sustainability going forward. We also need to calculate or understand the price actually achieved, that is, the price paid by funders, including the NDIS, and which the disability service sector cannot unilaterally change. In other words, we can't offer a higher price in relation to particular services and have expectation that funders would pay that. The difference between the two is, of course, the target price gap, and this is the key piece of information needed by disability providers in order to develop a financial management strategy. We will return to this idea of the target price, the achieved price, and the target price gap consistently throughout this webinar series, throughout the seminar series attached to the Costing and Pricing Learning Program, and more broadly. Let's just have a look at the materials that constitute the Costing and Pricing Learning Program. All of the materials are available on the Costing and Pricing Learning Program website. That is cplp.nds.org.au. The resources start off with the National Costing and Pricing Framework for Disability Services, what we call the framework. And the framework steps out the definitions and ideas associated with costing and pricing that are accepted broadly in the disability services sector in Australia. The idea of the National Costing and Pricing Framework, indeed, is to have as much uniformity around the discussion and the ideas as possible, not to prescribe what you should do in your organisation, but so that we're all talking about the same ideas and the same things when we're having discussions pertaining to costing and pricing. The second element, major element of this Costing and Pricing Learning Program is the study guide. And the study guide is a very critical element because that outlines and is really the core of all of the materials that are provided in the program. The study guide constitutes discussion pertaining to all of the elements of costing and pricing, how to go about it, the risk, governance, and so on and so forth. And it also has as its background or as its spine what we call a macro case study. And the macro case study is the presentation of a fictitious Brisbane-based medium-sized disability service provider that we undertake and use consistently throughout the study guide to demonstrate costing and pricing in a practical sense. The study guide is critical reading, and so where the webinar navigation beacons suggest to you to go back to that guide, it is really recommended that you do so. There are also, of course, seminar notes available, webinars available, of which this is the first one, and also the NDS website and Curtin websites provide certain tools and materials. Remembering, of course, the Costing and Pricing Learning Program itself is at cplp.nds.org.au. The final two elements that are mentioned on this particular slide are the NDS Curtin Costing and Pricing Tool and the NDS Curtin Costing and Pricing Tool User Manual. The NDS Curtin Costing and Pricing Tool is available from the Costing and Pricing Learning website as well as the Curtin website, and relates to or provides a Excel model for costing and pricing for small to medium organisations. Larger organisations might pick up aspects of the tool that they would find useful, but it's unlikely that large and complex organisations would use the tool. It's very much focused on small, medium organisations. Attendant with that tool is the user manual that I mentioned before, and that relates to and provides a step-through guide on how to cost and price using the tool. In combination with the study guide and the costing and pricing framework, the tool is very useful, as is the manual, for costing and pricing in a practical sense for small, medium organisations. How might you use these resources? Certainly, starting with the webinars is a good idea. As mentioned before, the webinars are designed to provide a taste of particular topics within the costing and pricing broader activities. They're not able to present the full detail because they're not long enough, and also because the intention is to guide people back to the study guide and the National Costing and Pricing Framework. Use the navigation markers, and I'll show you those in a slide in a second, to draw yourself away from the webinars and into the study guide and the National Costing and Pricing Framework. So in other words, use the webinars as your entree point into the material. Make sure you feel comfortable with the material covered before moving to the next webinar. And also remember, while we have a macro case study, which is the spine of the study guide and the materials under this Costing and Pricing Learning Program, there are also a number of micro case studies available which help you to master particular topics or look at nuanced elements that are not able to be dealt with in the macro case study. Finally, the seminars are available for self-study, but also available, as I mentioned before, to be presented via a facilitator. So use those seminars either in groups or arrange a facilitator and move forward from there. In terms of the facilitator, we also have some materials established that will help facilitators become familiar with the Costing and Pricing Learning Program, what materials are available, and also how we've emphasized things, how they might move forward. So in terms of that, trainers certainly have access to the Train the Trainer seminar, which is offered as part of these materials, and also we are able to offer the study guide and other materials within the Costing and Pricing Framework to professional trainers and others to help them to use it. Remembering though that the logo's colour schema and attributions, that is the recognition of the contribution of NDS and the Curtin Not-for-Profit Initiative, must be retained. Those Train the Trainer seminars are available on the website, and some are being presented in person, face-to-face, around the country where we can. That concludes this webinar. Sorry, it doesn't conclude this webinar. The navigation between resources, just very quickly, is quite clear. You can see those navigation markers at the bottom of the slide. SG standing for Study Guide, NF standing for National Framework. They're the navigation markers that are peppered throughout the webinars to help you to find your way through the materials. Okay, that does conclude the webinar now, and so the next webinar is Introduction to Costing and Pricing. So we will be looking at an overview of costing and pricing in webinar 2. In the meantime, we're very happy to have any communications at the Curtin Not-for-Profit Initiative in relation to any queries that you might have, in relation to any comments you might have, or where you might suggest even further materials or further topics for us to look at as we go through the webinar program. So don't hesitate to contact us. We'd be very keen to speak with you, and in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you soon.